thank you so much. We're going to move. I'm sure people have questions.
Yeah, any of you might have questions or concerns are welcome, of course, to please weigh in with comments. I'll be delighted to speak with you.
So what is the concept behind the new work that you're generously mirroring here in the middle of the universe, Times Square, across from the main branch of the 42nd Street Library?
I'm clearing my throat, Charles. There's no concept yet. I'm clearing my throat. I'm working up to it.
So, I will start then. You started as more traditional lyrical poet, I understand.
No, I've never been a lyrical poet. At least not really. I was an undergraduate and wrote poetry as an undergraduate that was lyrical, published a few things in student magazines, but determined pretty quickly that I was going to fail at poetry if I pursued this path through it. I was not likely to make an important contribution to it. But as a graduate student, I discovered the secret tradition of literature, the whole story of the avant-garde, and realized up until then I was trying to become the poet I should be, rather than the kind of poet I could be. Right? So I'm in the universe where I could be the kind of poet I'm supposed to be.
What was inspiration behind Sinotext in particular? What moved you in that direction?
About 25 years ago, I had published the book You Know I Am, a work that surprisingly went on to become a global sensation and won me the largest prize in the world at the time for poetry, the Griffin Poetry Prize. I didn't receive very much support up to that point while writing You Know I Am. It was a struggle to work on that book. I received no funding from arts councils or granting agencies. I couldn't convince anybody to be generous with it. And at the time, I presumed that because it was a sensation, probably the most successful work of poetry in modern Canadian letters, I thought I'd be given a lot of permission to be more ambitious, and that I would receive more generous or charitable support from my peers. Because of course, these grants and arts councils are run by peers, they're all peer reviewed. I have, of course, in the intervening 25 years determined that peer review has no incentive to reward peerlessness. Right? No incentive. At the time, I thought I could do something even more ambitious than You Know I Am, which was a very difficult enterprise. I didn't want to have to embark upon something harder. My first book of poetry, Crystallography, took me 4 years to write. You Know I Am took 7 years to write. The Xenotext.
Tell them why. I was there.
Yes, issues.
No.
Those who might have
And
known
all the dictionaries. Before the computers.
For those who may not have read You Know I Am, the work consists of 5 chapters, each of which tells a meaningful story that makes perfect sense. If I were to read it aloud, you would probably admire perhaps its musicality and poetic attitudes, but you wouldn't notice necessarily that there was anything unusual going on. But in fact, in the first chapter of the book, I tell a story in which I exclusively use the vowel A and no other vocabulary, exhausting the available repertoire of words. So A appears only in the first chapter. And then in the subsequent chapter, E, only E appears in that chapter, no other vowels. And I exhaust the available repertoire. I do that for each of the 5 vowels, demonstrating that it's possible to say something of literary merit while exclusively using this very Herculean constraint. I read an article by an astrophysicist, Paul Davies, that speculated that our search for extraterrestrial intelligence might be misguided if we're looking for radio beacons, because they're probably very difficult to sustain over epochal time. And UFO sightings notwithstanding, it's probably very difficult to send a spaceship across interstellar distances. Most scientists, at least since the 1950s, have presumed that we would encounter robotic probes from alien civilizations, ones that would show up, sit and wait for us to become sufficiently advanced enough to communicate, and then make their presence known. And such self-replicating machines, according to Paul Davies, that would go to a star system, adapt to the resource environment in that stellar system, building copies of itself and projecting those into the cosmos, could probably colonize the entire galaxy in a few tens of millions of years using conventional technology. However, we already have such self-replicating machines that are easily capable of adapting to the various resource environments that they find in their living things, like spores and viruses and germs. And perhaps, he speculated, there could be in our own ecosystems on the planet Earth organisms in which messages from outer space have been enciphered into their genetic codes, awaiting a moment for monkeys to get smart enough with fast enough computers to recognize that they're there after taking a census of all of the available DNA on the planet. We haven't gotten quite to that point where I think a graduate student might discover a message from outer space, but at the time that rather extravagant speculation inspired me to imagine that we could conceivably participate in a poetic enterprise that would do just that, encipher a poem into a genome and then send it out into the void with the hope that it might become a message in a bottle. About the same time, another scientist named Park Chung-Wong published an article demonstrating that he could encipher messages into the genomes of very hardy bacteria that would be capable of surviving in all kinds of hostile environments, and you could reconstitute those messages after they had been stored in that medium. So when I encountered these two articles, I decided, well, why wait for a civilization to address us? Why not be the civilization, right? And of course you want poets, I think, to be right on the ground floor of any technological innovation of this sort. I don't think you want the first messages enciphered into bacteria to be an ad for Microsoft. I think you might prefer that there be some more meaningful or substantive message. And I set out to undertake this stupid project. At the time, I thought it was going to be a relatively tractable problem. Sure, there's going to be some technological difficulties that I could probably overcome with some funding and expertise. I could probably teach myself the genetic engineering. I could probably teach myself the proteomic engineering, which I did. I could probably secure collaborations with labs. What I didn't realize at the time was that all of these technological feats were effectively impossible. And I think had I known just how hard this would have been, I don't think I would have embarked upon the task. But I solved each of the intervening problems, thinking that was the hardest step. And of course, they turned out to be the easiest step. Everyone got successively harder and more difficult and more discouraging. I got to a point where I was on the verge of success. I mean, I had to demonstrate that I could do this in a relatively well-understood bacterium before I could embark upon doing something more exotic. And so, bear in mind, I've had...
Don't be shy, name the bacteria.
A relatively well-understood bacterium, E. coli, and that's easy to engineer. But performing this particular task is very difficult. So I would say bear in mind that the odds I gave you, the 1 in 1 novum quinquagentillion, I had to do that twice. I had to solve, I had to undertake a task that was equally difficult as that 2 times, and succeed at it. When I first managed to get an actual viable response from the initial bacterium, the laboratories were thrilled. It was about 15 years worth of work at that point just to show that I could actually do it in some organism. And I announced very proudly that I had accomplished this benchmark, this particular step, only to discover a few weeks later that the bacterium was destroying my poem, destroying the protein that enciphered this poem. So instead of having created the world's first microbial writer, I had created the world's first microbial critic. And
Poem of fog.
yeah, I was not very happy about this, and that took another couple of years to figure out why it didn't work and solve that problem. Now, when you keep making rather elaborate promises, I'm going to write a poem that will outlast the sun. Wouldn't you like to see that? People aren't very impressed when you do something that is more modest in scale, right? If I promise to put a chimpanzee on the moon, you're not impressed if I put it in orbit. And after 15 years, I had managed finally to get to that stage where I could then prove that I could work with the more exotic organism. But as it turns out, that organism, Deinococcus radiodurans, is effectively resistant to manipulation and required a whole bunch of innovative tools to figure out how to solve the problem of making it work. The variety of options that I tried were educated guesses based on a lot of research, and I had tried many variations, all of which failed, and I had in the course of doing so, lopped off opportunities. Like you remove vast swaths of opportunities that you think might not work. And after about 25 years, I was very desperate because I had used up every single conceivable option that was available to me. And it was not looking like there was any successful route to the desired outcome. My last Hail Mary work in a laboratory in 2023, however, proved successful. I hit all 3 benchmarks that I required to indemnify the work and tell me that I had accomplished the task. And of course, I get this news from the laboratory. It just is an email. There's no hooray in the subject line or anything like that. It's just a rather nondescript email, which I opened. And of course, they don't interpret the information for you. I had to study the results myself. And of course, I'm looking at each one of the outcomes that I have to hit, and discovered that I've exceeded with this Hail Mary enterprise each one of those benchmarks, and that it's a grand success. Yeah.
How did it make you feel?
You might think that perhaps after 25 years of agony and fear that it was impossible, that I would feel euphoria or relief or some sort of ecstasy, excitement, and none of that happened. It was more frightening dismay, I think. I started weeping uncontrollably, and I have to say it was an hysterical response. I couldn't stop for a couple of days. I wept from about a Thursday till a Sunday. I got the news on Thursday, and I would say that my response was post-traumatic. It is very hard to run multiple marathons while people among your poetic community are booing from the sidelines. It's very difficult to not receive much support from peers, and to, in fact, receive hostility. It's difficult to invent things that have never existed before, right? Making contributions to the scientific community as a person who has no expertise in that domain, right? Demonstrating to peers in the sciences that I have the aptitudes to solve these problems, because of course they can't do that for me. I have to do all the design and engineering myself, and if things fail, I have to do all the troubleshooting myself. They can make things for me, they can verify things for me, but they can't do the heavy lifting of design. They got their problems. They have things, cancer cure, things like really important things to do. So I was in a state of real desperation. It took me a few days to recover from it, and I was sad, I would say. It frightened even. It was more like the experience you might have had if you were driving on a highway and narrowly avoided an accident. You're pulled over on the curb, and nobody's dead, nobody's hurt, no property's damaged, right? You're sitting there listening to the engine of your car tick down, with some suppressed panic, amazed that you're alive. It was something akin to that feeling, that I had climbed a cliff and now I'm looking down, and it's an immense height, and I didn't die while doing it. I didn't fail.
But what about the organism?
Well, the organism is, as I said, it's a very difficult bacterium to engineer. It's very poorly understood. It's a strange thing. It can repair its own DNA very quickly. If there's any damage to its DNA, it fixes it immediately. And as a consequence, that makes it a very durable archive for storing genetic information. It makes it durable. But it makes it also resistant to mutation and adaptation. Anything that can't allow its DNA to change doesn't evolve. And if you can't evolve, you go extinct. But this organism is managed to find its way into a little evolutionary cul-de-sac, an evolutionary dead end, which makes it so adapted already to the utter lethality of the universe that it doesn't need to change, ever. You can scorch it, freeze it, wither it, and it won't die. You can blast it with 1,000 times the dosage of gamma radiation that would instantly obliterate you, and it won't die. It can survive in the open vacuum of outer space, it won't die. We don't know where this organism natively lives, because there are no environments on the planet Earth that would drive its evolution into this strange niche of immunities to all kinds of diverse environments of immense hostility. And as a consequence, some scientists have speculated it must have spent at least part of its evolutionary history in outer space before being returned to the planet Earth. From my perspective, it's an organism that I can't make it do whatever I want. There are lots of naysayers among my critics who presume that I have done something evil by bending this organism to my will coercively, and that is makes me a bad guy. But in fact, it's the other way around. I've had to adapt completely to its constraints upon me and figure out how to make the sacrifices required in money, lucre, grief, blood, in order to satisfy this wee God. It is something like a private deity for me, I suppose. Prove that I'm worthy of its merit, so that it will, in fact, adjust itself to accommodate my intervention. It really is a dialogue with it. It's really an attempt to converse with the building blocks of life and to show the relationship that is implicit in the constraints between the English language and the genetic code. It's a bit spooky to imagine that the poems are there, embedded already implicitly within the constraints. I didn't write these poems, I found them. It's a carving away from a piece of marble and you find the David embedded within it. But I mean that quite literally, it's not an allegory. These things are somehow there already. And they contribute, I'd like to think, to some of the oracular dimensions of this work, to its spookiness and uncanniness. And of course the odds against it are so immense that I'm bewildered that I accomplished the task. And I will probably suggest to you that you shouldn't invest 25 years on a project.
Well, if somebody has a few decades to kill, and
well, the organism is so robust that it can conceivably outlast all of terrestrial civilization. That it will be on planet Earth when the sun explodes.
But the group that carries your poem, where is it?
The poem is currently at 2 locations. One is on record right now at the University of Texas, Austin, excuse me. At the Contreras Research Lab, they have live samples of the bacterium frozen in liquid nitrogen available for study. They're part of the intellectual property of the university. I have repatriated some small samples to a so far secret location in Canada, and I wish I could report on how amazing the repository is for these samples. But they're located in 2 places: one in the United States, and now one in Canada. In such a way that, at least in the case of Canada, those samples will persist for as long as Canada exists. I'm lucky. It may not be that long. At least they'll be in the 51st state. North of Nantucket.
So you didn't release any tonnage?
No, well, I'm kidding, of course, but the works are designed to be very durable and survive outside their current storage facilities, right? I mean, it would be unethical to release them into the wild. I don't have any intention of doing that. And of course, any claims to be made about their capacity to be in the environment are conceptual for this moment, because I'm not capable of putting it to the test, right? It would be unethical, I think, to release these works into the wild. But the laboratories have validated all of the results and got explanations in the book that show the proof of the accomplishment. And obviously I'm very proud of it, but I do feel quite exhausted by the experience. It has taken a lot out of me, I suppose. And of course the response to it after a year so far has been, I would say, somewhat muted.
Well, I want to mention one particular nasty response, not recent though, that I read that Christian is putting a loss in danger, and God knows what happens if it escapes. It can wipe out the whole of humanity. It's just like
there were lots of concerns among poets, especially that if I indulged in this enterprise, I would be perhaps putting at risk humanity, right? That I could conceivably wipe out
Maybe you put
humanity.
at risk that poetry.
Yeah.
I certainly put at risk the poetry.
It could cut out and kill us.
The work is intended to scare my friends and rivals in poetry, for sure. And people, I don't think, realize that it's actually very difficult to make something inimical by accident through genetic engineering. It is, however, very easy to design things deliberately that are inimical. Very easy. The chances of me doing something by accident that would be inimical, there's nothing inimical about this organism. It is, in fact, quite harmless, to be honest. There's nothing inimical about it at all. And I would joke in front of people who were expressing concern that I was going to wipe out humanity, that at least in the short term it would be really great for my career. I would become the most famous poet alive, right, that ever existed, right? You know, my notoriety would be unrivaled, right? Yes.
Murat.
I have a question. Since these poems are preserved in several institutions,
Yes.
what are you exactly performing?
How do you mean? I want those works to exist so that there's proof of concept. People could go conceivably to those locations and look at the organisms and study them. They can see them under a microscope. You can cultivate them, and you could characterize the protein, crystallize the poems out of it, genetically sequence them to read them. They're all intended eventually to be available to the public for inspection. I've written books, you know, the installments of that work appear in print so that people can actually follow along.
So the books are kind of holographs of the poems?
Yeah, they're apparatuses that provide support. The popsicle sticks that I've glued together to prop up these two tiny little poems that I think at first glance people would dismiss. But they took 4 years to write. One of the reasons for that is that, one reason, a difficult reason, is that they have to mutually encode each other. I try to explain the constraint by saying, look, you know, in a Sunday crossword, you might have a cryptogram, a secret message that's enciphered, and if you analyze its letter patterns and letter frequencies, you could substitute letters for that cryptogram and decipher the message. And I used to wonder as a child while playing those logic games why the puzzle designer didn't give us a meaningful message that makes sense, such that we could analyze its letter frequencies and letter patterns and substitute alternate letters that would decipher into yet another meaningful message that would also make sense. I now understand why you don't do that. There are, in order to mutually encipher these two poems, such that, for example, wherever you might see an A in one poem, you'll see a T in the other. Where you see N in one poem, you'll see an H in the other, and vice versa. When you see an E in one poem, you'll see a Y in the other, and vice versa. The letters in the poem are perfectly transposable with each other. There's about 8 trillion different ciphers that you could conceive of as a subset of all the ways in which you can encipher the alphabet. There's about 8 trillion ways of doing this. And I have to basically choose among those 8 trillion ciphers in such a way that I can write a poem that makes sense and is beautiful, such that if I replace it, every letter in it with its cognate from one of these selected ciphers, I get a new poem that also makes sense and is just as beautiful. And it's an impossible task, as it turns out. There are no ways to do it. The number is 0, except one case, the one that I've just demonstrated for you. There is only one way to produce 2 meaningful texts out of the 8 trillion available ciphers at your disposal. Could write all kinds of nonsense, I could write meaningless things, but I can't write 2 meaningful texts that are in mutual dialogue with each other. Even though these are poems that people at first glance dismiss, I have to tell them, look, they're fragile, because for me they reflect something about our relationship to the cosmic scale of the Milky Way. There are hundreds of billions of stars in this galaxy, suggesting that there might be as many as 8 trillion planets in the Milky Way. And at least at first glance, none of them are inhabited, right? We look around and we see no evidence of any intelligence anywhere, even though it should be obvious and everywhere, given the age of the galaxy. We see little evidence of it. Again, UFO sightings notwithstanding. And there's only one place in the entire galaxy where there's an intelligence that produces poetry, so far as we can tell. There's only one place out of 8 trillion worlds that has poetry. So these poems, there's only one cipher, only one poem out of 8 trillion viable options that are poetic. Right? It's as rare to me as the life in the cosmos. And it, I think, reflects upon that anomaly, that we are anomalous. And these poems are strangely anomalous. They're not something that you could just simply write up out of your own imagination. They are the direct effect of the constraints themselves. And the constraints are so onerous that there's no other way for them to appear. They're simply fossilized in the midst of all of these rules. And I have to note that in addition to that mutual encipherment that is required for me to even begin to think about how to put them into a biological framework, you then have to figure out how to encode them into proteins. And that's even harder. I didn't realize at the time that figuring out how to predict the fold of a protein was considered the hardest problem in biology, and there was no solution. No. And even now, we don't understand the principles by which proteins fold, even though we have AIs, of course, to assist us now and help us out with that task. We really don't get it. So it's a lot of voodoo, a lot of magic had to be, deployed in this exercise. Why I would declare that I'm probably the luckiest poet alive to have explored this immense haystack, where you might have imagined that it's so large it probably has lots of needles in it. Surely there'll be plenty of needles, and as it turns out, there's none. There's only one.
Following up on Murat's question,
Sure.
in the kind of press conference way, I mean, here we are in the center of the universe, Times Square, and from a Brooklyn point of view, a little bit off what you're doing. I mean, you give these odds which a person can't really comprehend.
That's right.
So let's just say, that we can't comprehend that. You just did a poetry reading.
Yeah.
Now, I like that poetry reading, irrespective of all that superstructure.
Sure. I hope the superstructure, though, helped you to appreciate it even more.
It helped me to appreciate it in a different way.
Yes, I'm sure that I probably contaminated a response to it.
Because I don't
by
have
offering-
I'm not going to make that value distinction.
Sure.
But nonetheless, I want to say, and you bring this here to us, I mean, the reading itself, even apart from this astronomically unlikely story that you told us, which I believe, by the way. That's my problem. Because I've read so much about it. But nonetheless, irrespective of that, in a kind of the old-time pataphysical way,
Sure.
which would not strand out into the actual natural world, because
Sure.
that's the distinction between you and Jerry. I mean, I'm more like Jerry. I just make it up, even when I'm saying now.
Yeah.
I'm committed to the actual physics and reality of it. Apart from that, still aesthetically, just as a reading, when I go to a lot of readings, I love the reading. I just like the way it all.
It has to sound good, yeah, sure, and it has to appeal to a wide audience, in my opinion. I have to try and create something that's capable of offering as many entrances as possible to it for a diverse variety of people who might want to encounter it. It's also one of the reasons that the work is difficult, because I could have written something that was meaningless, right? Like it's easily
just
conceivable.
ciphers.
Yeah, just ciphers. That I could have read that, and maybe some of my dearest friends would be satisfied with that experience, right? But I don't think my naysayers would be. And I'm trying to show, I think, to a peer group the capacity of poetry to do things that are unexpected, like really beyond our current imaginations. What poetry can conceivably do. I'm trying to respond, I think, to the affordances of the 21st century, really address it in a direct way, think deeply about what it might mean to be a poet at this particular moment. Certainly, embarking upon something so Miltonic or Homeric in scale, right, writing an epic poem of this sort, it's not fashionable, it's not considered something that would be first on your list of things to try. But I think I lament a little the loss of that one option for poets to adopt, that kind of Miltonic excess, to found a civilization, if you like, right? To write a real infernal grimoire, the Book of Skulls that would summon demons, right? Do something as dramatic as that. And I'd like to think that makes the work, that contributes to the endurance of the work, right? At least I hope that you're entertained, right? I mean, the way that you're watching gladiatorial combat, right? Yeah.
So by creating the poetry virus or a theory, right? So this is the way that the poetry takes over humanity, right? So instead of being killed by some stupid like COVID or hantavirus, you can be killed.
Well, I will reassure you that the poem has no adverse medical effect upon people at all. It's a completely harmless thing. Okay, there's no desire here to harm anybody. There are lots of people though who do think it's unethical of me to manipulate a living thing on behalf of art. What I don't like about those complaints is that they still seem to have rose bushes and chihuahuas. To me, the chihuahua is an undignified outcome for the dire wolf.
Peter, poetry will not kill you. It will, however, populate you.
Unhappy about the fact that a grand, noble animal is reduced to a dog you carry around in a purse in a subway, right? It's not great. And yet they're not, they might want to see me uprooted from the poetry community, but they won't uproot their rose bushes or kill their chihuahuas. And my poem doesn't do anything to this organism except adapt it to glow, red in the dark, and to respond to a genetic sequence in such a way that it will conserve a poem that is effectively communicating the gist of a love story that is as old as Western culture. I'm trying, I think, to show to my peers that poetry has a role to play in the long-term legacy of the deep time of the cosmos. That maybe one of the things that poetry is for, to ensure that we're capable of addressing people across deep time. The oldest poems on Earth are 40,000 years old, communicated by Aboriginals to plot navigation routes across a desert continent. And without those songs, you wouldn't be able to actually survive in that wilderness. We've founded historically religions that have been foundation of civilizations that communicate everything you might need to know in order to reproduce your society over thousands of years before you even write it down. There are cosmic threats that might await us in the future. They could include, of course, thermonuclear warfare or astrophysical barrage, among many other even as yet unknown cosmic threats. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to actually conserve our culture against those threats? Produce redundant forms of storage and libraries and archives that would endure in the face of them, so that conceivably we could reconstitute that culture. Kind of an Ozymandian gesture for poetry. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, thank you very much, and I'm very impressed. What you're saying, it actually calls for presentation, for something visual that explain to audience how it works, and why you don't, for example, bring at least some kind of technology that could be which me personally could decipher it and understand its value, and also. Okay, it's surviving any nuclear war, whatever, and after that some kind of, and also that's also the question. Okay, we could decipher it into English, but how decipher it in different language? How decipher it some alien language? And when we talk about poetry, it's also attached to our body. Mm-hmm. If there is no body, if there is no your psychology, if there is no your culture, there is no poetry or literature, because you have to have this body to decipher it. So how you give to aliens your body to understand what actually it's said about?
You give me two questions here. One about why did I bring in tech support to show how this work, right? For which I will beg forgiveness. Bear in mind, I've been working on this for 25 years. I have actually shown a dog and pony show many times, slideshows about this work many, many, many times, of course. And there's a point at which I would like to think that eventually people will know that this thing exists, right? That I won't have to continually resort to the introductory classroom dynamics of it. So it's been a long time I've been working on it, and I've had to talk to thousands of people over the course of that time. So forgive me for not showing you, slides. I'm hesitant to do so in part because technology always seems to fail. And let me tell you, having worked on an impossible genetically engineered bacterium, the technology seems to fail all the time. My mistrust of that is now acute. As for the capacity of poetry to be appreciated by, only by bodies, I have two rejoinders to that. I would simply note that we never know if there's any body at the other end of the line, on the other end of the phone call. I doubt that Aristotle knew that any of you existed and wouldn't read his work. Right? He doesn't even know that you happen. Right? I have no clue what role any of this will have in the future. I don't know how it will be used. I have no clue how anybody will interpret it. All I've done, effectively, is spray paint graffiti on an obelisk in the desert. Right? And it just so happens it might say something like, look upon my works, you mighty. Right? There are certain poets, I hope that they interpret this work in that manner. I hope that they look upon it with some discouragement. But the response to it is to quit. Right? Others, I hope, of course, it inspires. Right? That it may actually condition people to imagine greater things for poetry. Nobody knows who their addressee might be. And we've already sent out into the wilderness of the void at least 4 space probes that have messages attached to them with no guarantee that they will be interpreted by anybody. And they are gestures of faith in the future. Right? In my, I would say in my defense, everything I've done up to this point is a gesture of faith. On the one hand, maybe that I can do it, that I have the capacity or superhuman endurance required to accomplish the task. And that, in fact, it will bear out, despite what my peers may respond, how they might answer it, that it will actually serve to be useful to somebody in the future.
But I have to say this because I know you for so long, and it's a small enough group. It doesn't matter because you've done what you've done.
Yeah.
And we are here.
Yeah.
And we are responding.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's all we can do.
Yeah.
And that's all you can do.
Absolutely.
And all the rest is,
I know, it's a
speculation.
distraction. Yeah.
You just need better peers.
I don't think it's insignificant. It's sufficient. Is what I'm saying. I'm saying
Sure.
what you have done is sufficient because we are here.
Yes.
And we.
I'd like to think that that's true, but this question is probative, right? What do you expect about the readerships of the future? And I would simply say that, I'm not expecting that people will have, go to the trouble in the super intelligent raccoons millions of years from now are going to find this work and read it. They're not going to be able to decipher English. They're not going to be able to understand that there's a message attached to it, except insofar as there are signals in the gene sequence that demonstrate that it is artificial, that point to it and say, there is something meaningful here, even if you can't read it. I mean, I may not be able to understand Egyptian hieroglyphics, right, when I show up at the obelisk in the desert, but I know that it is the product of intelligence. Similarly, I think that even if the aliens were capable of unpacking the golden disk aboard the Voyager probes, the machinery of that probe will be more edifying than whatever sounds emanate from the disk. The demonstration of the intelligence involved, that phatic comment, here I am, where are you, is enough, right? That is fundamentally the basis for all communication, right? Is this thing on? Right? And if you say that, I think that's a certain kind of poetic gesture of proximity, nearness, that demonstrates a confraternity of minds. And we don't, so far, have that confraternity, really, at least on a cosmic scale. We haven't been able to detect that we're not alone in the universe. And we'd like to think that poetry has the capacity, of course, to preserve against the ephemerality of all of our existences something important, right? At least the demonstration that we were here, that phatic comment, a little bit of birdsong that says hello. Here I am. Where are you?
Here I am.
Mm-hmm.
Not to be too Jewish.
Yeah. I know, yeah. I hear it.
You are saying it.
Yeah. That's right. And it could be that when you look at the grandeur of the cosmos, to my mind, it seems aesthetic in scale. That it might be, in fact, the ruined menhir of an obelisk in the desert, right? The universe itself. Something left behind by an Ozymandian figure, right? Isn't that something that God would tell you? Look upon my works, you might be in despair. Look out into the cosmos. What are you going to feel? It's going to be a grand gesture, right? And here we are trying to unpack it, decipher it, find out what it might mean. But it seems basically to testify to some kind of incipient intelligence. And who knows? A work like this, I would like to think, induces a bit of paranoia in people. I know it does for me. Like the spookiness of it, of the outcome. On the one hand, I didn't write these poems; I found them, so to speak. Might suggest that there could be messages everywhere in your environment that are testifying to the existence of some intelligence larger than you, at a grander cosmic scale than us. And we are like, ants wandering around the, inscription on a tombstone, too small perhaps to see, right? That we're wandering around in an epitaph. And that's a question of scale, a question of our intelligence, a question, it's a test of our capacity to interpret the world. Who knows what kinds of messages might exist elsewhere that we could conceivably decipher. And I'd like to think that a work like this is intended to demonstrate this principle to my peers in poetry. The poetry might be everywhere, in everything, at every scale. Right? It is probably embedded in the genomes of organisms at the scale of sugar molecules, or it's perhaps written across the grandeur of the cosmic background radiation of the universe itself, just waiting for us to detect, the presence of that message.
Thank you, Christian.
Sure. I think one more comment that I would like to indulge.
Yeah, I still would like to know, that was my question.
Sure.
I didn't express it. What I noticed that insistently, you don't say, I'm going to read this poem, I'm going to read. The word is performance.
Sure.
And I would like to know more, what more can you say about this concept of the performance?
Sure. There's lots of people in the room here, I think, regard poetry as a kind of score that is not simply, read quietly, but might actually have to be read aloud in order to appreciate it. I regard performance, I think, as the last line in a syllogism arguing on behalf of the work. I have to be able to demonstrate to you that the work is meaningful to me by providing a charismatic experience of it, in the hope that you will want to then subsequently go out and buy a book, buy the t-shirt. There's that. I'm also demonstrating that I think you can tell from the structure and nature of the work that I'm probably a very Apollonian artist in my discipline, required to write these works. But I feel Dionysian in the act of performance, and for me that's a particular kind of
Very good.
equation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And thank you one and all for being so indulgent.
Thank you. Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity to say thanks to all.